Winter rains are back in Delhi yet again. It's frightfully cold outside, also wet. So I'm pushed back indoors and still in my do it yourself COVID isolation situation. Nevertheless, we have something very interesting to talk about and very important to talk about. And that is the debate that Rahul Gandhi has sort of lit up with his charge in parliament in response to the president's speech. He said, while reading out his larger charge sheet against the Modi government on the strategic issues, he made a very important argument. He said that this government's mishandling of the strategic situation has brought China and Pakistan together. Although he said that right through India's history, independent history, ever since border trouble started, I'm adding that, the endeavor of every Indian government was to follow a policy so China and Pakistan would not come together. Now they had come together and that was working to India's detriment. He also then went on to say, see, look at how they are talking, look at how they are discussing, I know what they are planning, look at what weapons they are buying. He's obviously referring to Pakistan in this case. And also that this is a very big danger and we have to think about it. And that danger is China, because the Chinese have now come in eastern Ladakh and they are refusing to go away. Every other day they do something or the other to rub their finger into India's eyes, as they've done just now by getting this colonel who was injured in Galwan to be part of the torch relay at the Winter Olympics. Now, immediately that got a response from the BJP side, and the BJP counterattack was led by Foreign Minister Jaishankar, who was also a redoubtable mind. He's been part of the making of India's strategic policy for many decades as a professional diplomat. His late father, Dr. K. Subramaniam, from whom we learned so much from his writings as well as from listening to him and our interactions with him. He's been one of the founders of India's strategic policy, which has generally remained consistent. Now, he replied saying that, look, who brought China and Pakistan together? And he makes the point that this is something that's gone on over 6 decades. And he begins his history lesson, see these tweets, with 1963. 1963 is when China and Pakistan signed their first major agreement, whereby Pakistan ceded to China a bunch of territory that wasn't its own. That is the Shaksgam Valley in what is described as the Trans-Karakoram area. This is in Pakistan occupied Kashmir and officially, morally, constitutionally, for us in India, a part of our country. It's our territory. Look at the map of India. It's our territory in that sense. But Pakistan traded this with China to settle their borders and saying that our borders are settled. Now, again, if you look at the map of this region carefully, you will realize that practically all of what Pakistan calls its border with China is actually not its border with China. It is the border that Jammu and Kashmir shares with China. It just so happens that this part of Jammu and Kashmir is under Pakistani occupation. To that extent, even the India-China border or line of actual control, say in Ladakh, is also part of the original Kashmir territory. Now, when the Pakistanis signed this agreement, look at the state of the world. And I will also then go step by step like this, because Rahul Gandhi's point is that you guys have brought Pakistan and China together in a way that they have now become such a big danger for India. Jaishankar's point is we didn't start anything, we didn't light the fire, it was always burning since 1963. So what are we talking about? And who was in power in 1963? He doesn't say it, but Rahul Gandhi's great-grandfather, right? Then followed by Lal Bahadur Shastri, then by Rahul Gandhi's grandmother, then with brief interregnums by Gandhi family in one way or the other, mostly again. Now the fact is, there is some justification in what each one is saying, and I'm not indulging in both sidism. I'm just going by facts because these are complex issues. It is true that in 1963, Pakistan and China reached out to each other. Why did that happen? That happened, and you can see where China was coming from at that point and where Pakistan was coming from. 1962, until 1962, India and China had managed their tensions to a certain extent. They had not let them go out of control, although border tensions had started from mid 50s onwards. But 62, then the dam of patience and restraint broke on both sides. A very bad war, short war, but a bad war took place, which China won without a doubt. Now, the Chinese at that point had a bunch of border disputes with their neighboring countries. So, one, simply it would have suited them to settle their border with one country, which in this case was Pakistan. Second, among the many border disputes that China had at that point, which were alive, there was a sizable one with Soviet Union as well. Now, while China and Soviet Union had been allies, communist brothers for a long time, now some tensions were becoming visible and they were going their own ways. Although in the 62 war, the Soviet Union did not back India wholeheartedly, but they were sort of neutral. And the Chinese, in fact, may have seen it as a letdown that they were not more supportive of China. They had already begun to sell MiG 21s to India and also helping India set up the factory to make that aircraft, which at that point was the frontline fighter in the world indigenously. So India-Soviet relationship was warming up at that point. The Chinese had border trouble there. The Chinese had issues with India. So they thought, why not follow the smart policy of enemy's enemy being your friend? Now this period, say 1963 to 65, was also probably the most friendless period in India's strategic and foreign policy making. China, which was a friend who Nehru had cultivated for a long time, was now an enemy, but China was not really a strategic partner. India had been quite non aligned by then. India had bought some stuff from the British, some military stuff, but that was not really a military relationship. That was mostly because of the payback of the money left over with the British after independence. So there wasn't really a military or defense or strategic relationship anywhere. When the Chinese attacked, given the fact that Soviets were conflicted at that point, they didn't know who to choose. And if anything, they might have been inclined a little bit more towards the Chinese. Nehru reached out to the Americans. So the Americans began helping. So by 1963, India was trying to grow a more friendly relationship with America strategically. 1964 May, as we know, Nehru died. Kennedy had been assassinated also, and that relationship pretty much remained stillborn. It didn't go anywhere. By that time, India-Soviet relationship had not really blossomed. So 65, when the war took place, India was closer to the Soviet Union. That's why Soviet Union could get involved in holding the Tashkent summit and in brokering that Tashkent Accord. But the fact is that this was a period of friendlessness in Indian strategic policy. You can blame any government or any political formulation, but that is quite correct. 1966, China started selling military equipment to Pakistan. In the course of time, it became Pakistan's biggest military supplier. Today, by far, also because Americans are now not even marginal suppliers, because American supplies stopped pretty much around time the Americans tightened the tap on that aid flow. Since then, it's the Chinese who the Pakistanis have depended on. Now, if you see the evolution of this relationship, this has generally followed, each landmark has come after a war in the subcontinent. 1962 was the war between India and China. That's when Pakistan and China came together and made their border settlement. So Pakistan handed over Shakscam Valley to China. 1965, again a war between India and Pakistan took place. At that point, Pakistan realized that one, that the Americans, although they could not stop it, and maybe they didn't even want to, they always knew they will not be able to stop Pakistan from using weapons that they had been given ostensibly to fight the communists against India. They had all stopped weapon supplies, because at that point there was bad odor to two really poor countries fighting like this amongst themselves. So Americans stopped supplying weapons to Pakistan. So Pakistan found an immediate ally in the Chinese. In the 65 war itself, the Chinese had served an ultimatum on India, saying that unless you return so many of our sheep and yaks are the mountain buffaloes, that you have stolen or that your herdsmen have stolen, we will reserve the right to retaliate. In fact, it was seen as a bit of a joke also, or at least some people tried to have little fun with it. So Shashi Bhushan, who used to be Congress party's local leader in Delhi, quite voluble and quite visible, he even held a protest demonstration, peaceful protest demonstration in front of the Chinese embassy. And marching with him were a bunch of sheep and buffaloes, saying that, look, if this is all you want, take it, let's say, both our countries the scourge of war. But the fact is that during the India-Pakistan war, the Chinese did serve this ultimatum on India, which would have also sobered our side, our planners a little bit, because nobody would have liked a two-front war. So in 65, for the first time, I would say that India began thinking of a two-front war. And 64 it was when the Chinese also tested their first nuclear weapon. So the strategic picture in the subcontinent was now changing. 66, China started supplying Pakistan military hardware. Now, post 1965 is also the period when India leaned towards the Soviet Union and started buying its first serious military hardware from the Soviet Union. In fact, no surprise then that when the two countries' armies again came to fight a war together, that is in 1971, the bulk of the tanks the Indian army used, for example, were T-55s, Russian tanks. A lot of the tanks the Pakistanis used were T-59s, which was a kind of a version of that the Chinese had made and sold to the Pakistanis. So by 71, China was fully a Pakistani ally, and India had Soviet Union as its ally. Now, this was a very interesting period. Once again, it is true. So Rahul Gandhi would be right to say that every government acted in the period so far to prevent China from Pakistan to coming together. But China and Pakistan kept on coming together as they did in 1971. What the governments did was, if they could not prevent that from happening, to balance that. So Mrs. Gandhi balanced that by signing that Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation with the Soviet Union, and also becoming pretty much a Soviet ally and developing Soviet Union into such a reliable supplier of military hardware on very easy terms of trade. So India had been able to balance the two. Also, with that relationship, India was able to keep the Americans from interfering or intervening in that war until Bangladesh was liberated. So this has been a challenge right through. One, to avoid a two-front situation. In 1965, Chinese made the point to us that that's a possibility. In 1971, the Chinese did not intervene nor made noises of that kind, because now they knew that Soviet Union was on the other side, and also by this time they had begun to improve their own relationship with the Americans. This was going through a very sensitive period. Pakistan was a broker in that relationship. So they decided to be patient, because every nation acts in its own interest. They don't act out of philanthropy. Now, after this war, as I said, after every war, something's happened, something major has happened in the subcontinent's geopolitics. In 1972, Pakistan and China began their strategic relationship. It's around that time that Bhutto talked of the Islamic bomb. Now we know that through the 70s, 80s, and onwards, the Pakistan Chinese collusion for nuclear weapons and missiles has gone on, irrespective of who's been in power in India. So once again, you can keep them away to the extent that they will not come together and be a nuisance to you on your borders at the same time. That the governments have so far been able to managed to do. But to keep them away from each other, nobody has been able to do. So that's why Jaishankar is also right. Now, we know the rest of the history is more recent. The big change that's come about in the past 3 years is since the change in the status in Jammu and Kashmir. And that is what Rahul Gandhi is referring to, I think, although it does not specify it. 5th of August 2019, you changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir. You declared Ladakh into a union territory. Ladakh is where you share a disputed border with the Chinese. The Pakistanis had made the Chinese a party to the Kashmir dispute in 1963 by handing over Shakskan to them and also saying in that agreement that Kashmir dispute still exists between India and Pakistan, and once there is a final settlement, the country that comes to have Kashmir as a part of its territory will reopen negotiations with China. So to that extent, China already had been brought in as a party to the Kashmir dispute. Now, as India changed the status of Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, that gave the Chinese another provocation. And then that statement by Home Minister Amit Shah that we will get Aksai Chin back, uske liye chahe apni jaan bhi na deni pade. He is referring to that as having been a provocation. Now, was it a provocation or not? We don't know. Because nobody reads the Chinese mind with any degree of assurance. In fact, even now, we are seeing Chinese literature on 1962 war being sort of declassified or released in small driblets. So we don't quite know. Although I will also say that I had written a national interest short just as the Chinese emerged in eastern Ladakh, saying that Modi government should have known on 5th of August 2019 that the Chinese were going to come into this area. And I thought the Chinese were just making the point that they are also party to this territorial dispute. The fact that they have stayed on this long and the fact that their relationship with Pakistan has only become warmer and stronger is something which is of significance. Now, Pakistan, on the other hand, does India have a two-front problem right now? Everybody likes to talk about two-front problem because you must prepare for the worst. But the fact is that as the tension with the Chinese has increased, in fact, the tension with the Pakistanis on the LOC has come down because the two countries have decided on a ceasefire. That ceasefire is holding so far, right? It's not as if there is any other warming of the relationship, but it looks like there is some back channel contact. And now Mia Mansha, who's a little bit like Pakistani Ambani, not exactly, but a little bit like that. He's a big textile czar who's also now bought over Muslim Commercial Bank, which was the biggest PSU bank that Pakistan government has privatized. He made a statement someplace in a speech that something is going on the back channel, and usually these people are in the know of what's going on. So it's possible that there might be a further thawing. So India is not facing a clear and present two-front situation. At the same time, the relationship between Pakistan and China is not just warmer than before, but is tighter than before and more military and more strategic than before. Also, it's very economic now. So there is an economic dimension as well because of the construction of the CPEC, Pakistan being one of the first members of BRI. In fact, that is something that Imran Khan has also underlined in an op-ed article he has done for Global Times in China, such as it is. He's also said that this is a very special relationship, etc., etc., and he's going to be present at the opening of the Winter Olympics, and after that has long sessions of talks with Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang. So as we speak now, the Pakistanis are already inducting the latest version of Chinese main battle tanks, that is VT-4 tanks. The Chinese have already sold the Pakistanis Wingloom 2 unarmed combat aerial vehicles, that is drones that carry weapons. And in fact, when these were given, the Chinese media themselves had boasted, oh, this is something that India's forces in the Himalayan regions in the mountains are going to find devastating, right? And if you want to read more about it, read also this article on The Diplomat, which is a website by Indian expert Rajeshwari Pillai Rajgopalan. So where does it bring us in this debate? Rahul Gandhi is right when he says that every government in India's history has tried to ensure that Pakistan and China do not come together, and I'm translating the rest, to the extent that they present to India an active two-front challenge. Jaishankar is right to say that look, no government has succeeded in preventing Pakistan and China from coming together. This collusion has gone on for a very long time. We didn't light the fire. This has been going on since 1963, since your great grandfather's time. So he's right to say that. At the same time, the question he would be asked is how successful has your government been now in preventing that two front situation? If you look at the picture on the ground right now, while, as I said, there is some thawing between India and Pakistan, the two front situation looks more real, the two front threat looks more real today than it has done in the past many decades. And to that, if I may add a little analytical point, and to that, a little contribution is also made by Modi government's internal politics. Because given their own internal politics, they do not want to be seen to be making up with the Pakistanis too soon, or even calming things down with the Pakistanis too soon, or even being kind to the Pakistanis too soon. And at this point, it's quite evident the Chinese are not interested in letting things thaw at their end. So this is where India stands geostrategically in the region right now, and that's why it's been a very good debate in Parliament.